Welcome. I'm Sally Treanor, and this is the Watercolor series. It's fall here in Buffalo, and we, like always at fall time, to take at least one lesson and do fall leaves, usually on their branch, usually in the attitude in which they hang from a tree. And so that's what we're going to be doing today. Going to be working a limited palette, and we're going to be using brown matter for our red, New Gamboge for our yellow, and cobalt blue for our blue, probably with a +1 of French ultramarine. So let's begin. I'm going to start this a little bit differently than I usually do. I almost never draw these because I find that when I do, I end up almost producing a coloring book, and I don't like that to happen, and I don't seem to be able to control myself in any way that allows me to do this in a graceful way that isn't a coloring book. So right now, this is left over from the Stan Kurtz workshop. So this is cobalt blue. This is New Gamboge, but I will replace the alizarin crimson with brown matter. Okay, I have here what's called a mop. This is an Escoda number 18, but its characteristic is this, belly that's quite wide, nice tip, lovely brush. It holds a lot of water and it holds a lot of pigment. And so I want to do this exercise with this brush, suggesting all my shapes. They're going to all run together across the page. I'm going to do some branch work. I'm going to do things that are suggested by my very busy branch of small leaves here. But let's go ahead and mix our puddles. So look at this, folks. Right into the New Gamboge first.
Yay, Sally.
For those of you who are new to me, you will know that I almost instinctively, every time I go to mix a green, go into the blue first, and then I adulterate my yellow. But this time I thought ahead. As you can see from this puddle, New Gamboge is a very warm yellow. And I love that about it, but it definitely makes distinctive greens, and all kinds of things happen because it's such a warm yellow. When I say it's warm, I see a lot of red in that. So now let's pick up some of our cobalt. And my brush was already loaded with yellow, so I'm into a puddle that was already here that was cobalt. And I'm going to add some of that French ultramarine to deepen it a bit because it's fall, and the greens are not bright in fall. The leaves are getting ready to shed those greens and drop off the trees. I'm also going to take some of my brown matter and lower the intensity even more. So I darkened it by adding my +1, which is French ultramarine, lowering the intensity by adding red. So red and green, opposites on the color wheel. Anytime you add one to the other, you lower its intensity. This is very wet brush. I'm way up on the tip of my brush, and I'm just going to do leaf shapes. I'm not going to pay attention to where they touch one another, and I'm going to end up with maybe a silhouette. But because this brush is just loaded with water and pigment. Okay, this is a maple leaf. And keep available a smaller brush. I'm going to use, this is a 12. I'm going to make a puddle of brown matter to have, maybe to drop in here and there, because Now remember, this has every color I'm using in it. Just taking the brown matter puddle, and I'm going to add just to the edges. I'm not going to worry a whole lot about it. And I'm going to take another brush, a rigger. Make a little puddle of cobalt so that I can also drop blue into these leaves. You have to do this when it's wet. Don't wait. Do it per leaf. And you can also, if you have enough brushes, which I do. This is one of my joys in life, having enough brushes. You can also drop yellow into that little puddle. And already we've got a gorgeous leaf. Okay, now ignoring that leaf, and I'm just looking at this kind of loosely, using my brush, looking at the number of lobes those leaves typically have. Gonna repeat that process and drop a little yellow in. I'm not paying any attention to where it's going when I drop it in. And I've got puddles all over the place. And I don't care that it's blue and it's yellow and it's red on top of green. I don't care. And my brush is just so loaded with paint that I'm going to have to probably mix another puddle. Okay, this guy is going to run into this guy. Ha! Too bad about that. The stems on these leaves, I start away from the leaf and I introduce the stem to the leaf. Don't care too much about where they start yet, but make it a direction that makes sense. I can also, at this point, use my stylus to give myself some veins if I want them. But I'm not going to do that every place. That would be boring. Don't overdo things. Sometimes I can't help myself. I do that anyway. Back into the yellow, back into the blue, back into the deeper blue, back into the red.
What was your deeper blue, Sally?
It's French ultramarine.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's start down here. Again, right up on the tip of this brush. It's running into some other leaves. Do I care? I do not. Because the way leaves, they don't always present to me face on. They sometimes, look quite eccentric. So I'm not worried about producing little leaf shapes every single time, because sometimes they flutter in the wind and they turn back on themselves. And I'm getting, because I've added the French ultramarine, I'm getting some nice granulation. Make the leaves logical, but not perfect. Don't worry about perfect. And because I've got this slope here, I have a big puddle at the tip of each of those down pieces, lobes of the leaves. So I'll probably wick some of that up. I'll have to stop, but I want to make sure that anything that's wet that I want to add color to, I'm doing that now. You're going to find that it's a little illogical to be putting these triadic colors in here. But just believe me that when it's all done, you're going to be glad you did it. And if you do it now, it's going to be fresh and beautiful. All right, now I'm going to take just a plain water brush, make it a thirsty brush. I'm going to wick up some of this excess paint here. Oh no, I'm wasting paint. It's going to take a bit because I use this great big brush, there's a lot of excess here. So you just want to not have it so loose and so available that it's going to run all over the place. And don't worry when you touch one to the other. It's not going to hurt anything, because you can come back and define those leaves. I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit more vein work because it gives direction to the leaves that makes them a bit more logical if you're trying for logic. And don't forget, if your stems are a different color, make them a different color. And always introduce the stem or the base or whatever it is to the active leaf. Don't start at the leaf and drag out. You're not going to get the same kind of burst of color. And it's nice to have that burst of color. I'm liking what's happening when I'm dropping blue in, and these are all wet enough that I can keep doing it. And because it's so wet, I don't have to worry about, they're not going to make a dot. They're going to move all through that paint and produce some interesting stuff happening. Let it happen. Don't try and force it. Let the paint work for you now. You can always come back and fix it. Okay. I don't care that this has little squiggles and things in it. It's way too wet. So let me I'll squeeze out this brush and take this back up with that brush I was working with. So, I hate to waste paint. So new leaf, I can make that stem come in at any time. Start back here. This is companion to that. Now that I'm dropping in red, I can just keep doing that. Try not to be polka dotty. Don't give it the measles. Some yellow. One of the reasons this works and you retain the color that you're dropping in is, remember that what you drop in is the wettest. And so it moves what's there out of the way. And that means it moves the pigment out of the way rather than mingling with it. It's just like what we were doing when we were doing bands of color. The rule is, and this is a rule of physics, the wettest moves what's there out of the way. And that's what gives us the beautiful watercolory things happening. I just love it. That's why I do watercolor. It does my work for me. It plays games. It is a joyful medium. Sometimes it makes me feel better when I don't feel good. I am, you may have noticed, on a high after that workshop from last week. Stan Kurtz, great inspiration. Now, let's not ignore, I'm going to go with another brush. Let's not ignore the fact that I've got a branch that these things are attached to. However, don't want to, up here, there's other stuff happening. Here's a leaf up here that's not aligned with these leaves here, especially. And we'll just do a little drop in color with that. I especially like dropping in the yellow for some reason. There's something about that glow it gives us that's really kind of special. And again, I'm going to squeeze this out so it's a thirsty brush. To get rid of these. I'm just wicking up that excess water at the, the low point. So now let's bring in a branch. So I've brought over a new brush and I'm going to mix up a branch color. How do I pick up some red, pick up some blue? Got myself in a little corner there. Pick up some yellow. Adulterate the yellow. Now I've got a very rich brown. I've just added more blue to it.
That's French ultra, right? You're adding to it?
It's or cobalt.
Okay.
They are the same hue. They act a little bit differently.
Okay.
And a little more red. Okay, I'm gonna bring in the branch from over here, and again way up on the tip of my brush. Introduce it to the leaf. Continue it over here. Continue it over here. I don't care that it's hitting these leaves. Branch down here. I'm interrupting the stroke every time I come to a bunch of leaves. And now I'm going to do the same thing with the branch that I did with the leaves. I'm going to drop in color. It's already drying. I'll make that thicker. Little ticks here and there. Okay, got to do this fast. So drop in that blue. Blot your brush first. Let the blue just flow through the branch color. Drop in some red. And even when it's dried out, you can re-wet next to it. Like this branchlet here, it started to dry. So I'll wet going away from it and come up to it and touch where I dropped in some red. I'll drop in some more blue. Even though it doesn't seem right to you, do it anyway, just to please me. And you can always come in with your branch color again to wet next to something that was too dry to absorb and distribute the drop-in color. And use all three. Okay. When we stopped before, I had put in the branch. And I've got a couple places where the branch is covering things and behind things, and I want to correct some of it. So this is the same brush that I used with the branch tones on it. And it's a fairly saturated puddle, which I want. So I'm going to put this leaf behind this little branchlet that I'm going to add now. And I'm right up on the tip of my brush because I want to control how thick that branch is. And the reason I'm putting it like that is I want this little element to attach to this branch. And I'm also going to put this branch that was behind that leaf in front of it. So you can see how you can add to things and change where they are in space after other things are dry. You can come back and make things happen differently. And I like what I just did here. It gives me a more logical way for these things to interconnect. And I've just re-wet the whole length of that. And I'm going to, I'm going to go ahead and just to enliven that branchlet, I'm going to add some red to it and let it, because now it's wet again, and some blue. And I don't think I'll add any yellow to that. It doesn't need it. But I'm going to put little ticks coming off the branch to kind of show, you know, again, it's had things happen to in its life. Now, the one thing I'm going to show you again is how to make those leaves using your brush in a good way that's really utilizing the brush. Oops, wait, I just have to join this better to this branch there. That's better. Okay. So picking up that puddle that I still had going, I'm holding the brush further away from the ferrule, which is this metal part. And well, actually, I'm going to stand up so I can do this better. Now I'm back to some of my sumie stuff where I'm using this, my torso, the center of my torso as my center of gravity, and my shoulder as the fulcrum, not my wrist. When you're using your wrist, you're using your brush like you would a pencil or a pen. And we don't want to do that. And I have to mix a little more paint because it's dried out. Again, going into the yellow after I went into the blue. It's just my style. Something about that pristine yellow that I have to destroy. Okay. So I have lots of things going on down here, but I actually probably am going to bring another branch in down here up on the tip of my brush. And I'm going to make just, to me, flowing strokes, a little bit arbitrary, that are producing for me kind of a maple leaf shape. Okay, and remember, I told you you have to do this while it's wet. So while that leaf is wet, a little bit of, I need some stem action on that leaf. I don't know where it is going, but it's time to put that stem right there. I went over the bottom of this leaf. I don't care. I can come back and fix that. I am just dropping the color in by touching the page of wet paint. It's important that you just touch. You're not brushing it on because that'll cause it to mix. You're just touching it and letting it flow, drop out of your brush into the leaf. Now I've got pure yellow. I'm surprised I have any pure yellow. I'm dropping yellow into that new leaf. And I'm always blotting so that I'm not coming in with, you know, just invading. And I'm just touching that yellow to the leaf and letting the paint flow out of the brush. I'm going to take my brush that I've been using that has all the color in it to wick up this excess paint down here. And I just squeezed it right back into the puddle of color. So I didn't waste that paint. I feel very virtuous. And let's do some blue because the blue gives me some really cool stuff happening. blot the brush, drop it in, let it flow, let it do its own thing. Let's do a couple veins. That's a really pretty leaf. I like that. Let's do some more of those. We'll end up having another branch coming over here, maybe. I don't know yet when, where, maybe not today, but okay. My fulcrum is my shoulder. I'm up on the tip of my brush. I'm manipulating my brush and making it do my shapes for me and making them eccentric and beautiful and leaf-like, as if this leaf was glowing in the wind and producing just excellent, excellent personality all by itself. Got my red. Let's introduce a stem. We'll do that behind this leaf. Bring it up. Remember, you introduce the stem to the object. I'm letting this one hide behind that leaf so we can make another decision later on as to what it's attached to in space. I'm going to touch it a couple more places with the red. I'm just touching it, letting the paint flow out, letting the watercolor do my job for me. I am not brushing this on. I'm letting it just be distributed through the water that's available to it. Now we'll come in with some yellow, blot my brush beforehand. Again, I'm up on the tip of this brush, so I'm not opposing any more of the brush than its very, very tip. And letting it, I can see it flow out of the brush. I'm not brushing it on. You have to really get a feel for this and make yourself do that. And you have to do it leaf by leaf. As you do a leaf, do the drop-in color. And don't ignore the blue, because the blue gives some gorgeous stuff happening. I like it. And I've started to use a little bit more of the French ultramarine because it's giving me some pretty granulating stuff happening. That's really nice. These leaves are cooperating. Okay, another leaf. I don't care if I'm going to just paint over this leaf. How about that? They're all on their own. This is very wet. But it'll also give me a paler leaf. Again, I'm letting the brush design for me, but I'm causing it to make strokes in certain directions, and I'm pressing more or less to get what I want. And sometimes it just does things on its own that I like, but mostly I'm causing it to give me things that I like. And, finally, I am the director of the brush, the director of the painting, but the paint is giving me these gifts. So look at this. It's leaf-like. It even is going to look more leaf-like when I start dropping in color, because I know I can do that. So now I'm going to pick up some yellow. And I've already wicked up the bottom. And I covered the bottom of this leaf, and this leaf is darker. So this leaf is going to be behind it, but I'll emphasize that later on. A little more yellow. Come in with the red. And the red at this stage of this leaf's life tends around the edges. And I really do like this blue as it comes into the leaf. Now, this is a lighter leaf. Let's see what happens. Again, make sure you are dropping the color in, not painting it on. And I'm no longer paying attention to my source. I've got it here to inspire me as to what leafness is, but it's not causing me to try and replicate what's in front, what's behind, how that whole thing is working. I need a little more yellow in this one. And I think I'll evade it up a little bit. Yeah, I'm liking these leaves. They're all individuals. They are just telling me their stories so happily. Let's just put smaller leaf back here, and it'll just be, part of the scenery. Maybe won't do much of anything to it. Maybe a little drop in color, but very light in value. Maybe a couple up here. Just leaf shapes to show that this is part of a crowd. This is a colony of leaves, not just isolated fellows. And for those leaves, we don't want them to have too much going on in them. They're mostly just silhouettes of leaves. I'm dropping a little bit of yellow to give them a bit of a glow. This guy's closer to us. You can have conversations with your leaves. They'll tell you what they want. All right, last week I developed this with this big brush. This is a big mop. Some of you have them, some of you do not. I don't insist that you have them because they're not tricky brushes to use, but we don't use them often. But one of the reasons I like them for leaves is that it allows me just really a lot of freedom when I'm making leaf shapes. And let me just show you that. New gamboge. This mop is just a little miracle of how much water it holds and how much pigment. So here's my basic green. And I also used a little bit of French Ultra to get some granulation going. So let's just take a look at what that gives us. All right, when I'm using a mop like this, I quite often will stand to paint so that I can really use my whole body as a fulcrum of what I'm doing. And so I'm just going to add some leaves in a couple of places and let's see what happens. This is like a big column right now, and maybe I would cut it off, but I think I'm going to add some leaves over here just because I can. Making strokes. That simulate how these leaves look. These leaves have red stems. When you're introducing the stem to the leaf, I always switch to a smaller brush. I have better control. And blot, always blot. So I touch the wet paint of the leaf and it becomes now a little spot of red. I'm taking another brush that has just plain water in it. It's a thirsty brush. And I'm taking up some of that excess. I'm gonna drop in some yellow because it'll give me something cool happening. And some red. I like to switch for drop-in color quite often to these littler brushes. I have more control over how much water, even after I blot them. Mind you, these make a distinct shape when I drop them in, but if I leave them or if I shift the paper, they'll give me some very interesting things happening. And let's just drop in some of our blue, and it will be the Antwerp I drop in. And let's give this leaf some veins. Don't overdo giving veins to things. Sometimes, the temptation is there to just put all the veins in, but just suggest them. Don't give your viewer, don't do their work for them. Let's do another. Let's do it over here. I love to do thick, thin drawing with my brush because it gives me all these wonderful squirrely shapes. I went right over another I went right over another leaf, and you'll see why in a minute. But it's not bothering me to have done that. I'm dropping some red into this leaf. I'll drop some yellow in. Maybe I'll redefine this a little bit because there's lots of pigment there. Mind you, this is still very distinctly a maple leaf. I don't have to make that leaf terribly realistic at this point because I'm only seeing part of it. But we do want to add some red to it. Although we just did that with the blue brush. Oh well. A little more red. New puddle of red with no blue in it. Always blot your brush before you go in so you don't flood things. If you want veins, put a few veins in, not all of them. Got to do that while it's wet. So I'm already getting some stuff happening here that is going to be background. But one of the big things I want to do, and I'm not going to use the mop anymore. I need better control over the brush than that. I have a puddle here from last week, same colors. I want my branch color to be gray. I can get any place I want with this triad. I just have to keep mixing until I'm at the right shade. But anytime I have a triad that's successful, I can get to a gray and finally to black. It might take me a little longer. Okay, now we're getting there. I feel a need for a branch coming in here. So again, using my brush, a bigger brush. Oops. I'm gonna touch that, which is still wet. Come out over here. So I have this nice wet branch. I'm gonna give myself some little ticks where branches have fallen off, like branches with character. And now, just what I've been talking about right along, here we go with some drop-in color. And the color that we're dropping in is blot your brush. The color we're dropping in is the color that is one of the colors from the triad. Blue is not showing up particularly well, but that doesn't matter. Sometimes when I'm doing that, I also paint a little bit beyond what is actually the form of what I'm doing, and that'll give me an area that shows that color better. I usually do it at the edge, so a little bit of that color sneaks out beyond the confines of the branch itself. So I'm getting, and then I'll take a picture of this so that you see what's happening with this. I'm using all three of these colors, and it's going to bring this branch to life. I love this part. It's the magic part. Now my first drop in of yellow was unblotted. So, the dangers of doing that. However, I can correct that if I take, I'll switch to a clean brush, thirsty brush. I'm going to take some of that yellow out. It's a little too assertive. So I'm wicking up that extra color. Now I have here just an absolutely beautiful branch. I've changed the dynamic of this whole thing. I think I will maybe, no, I'll leave it. Okay, now I've got dry areas of this paper that I can come into and play some games with. So let's make sure we have a good big puddle of green. And we'll get some of that French ultramarine into it too. And let's separate out some of these leaves. What's in front, what's behind. This leaf is on top of this leaf. And so I'm going to paint on the back leaf. And then I'm going to come in with a damp brush. And I'm going to lose the edge. And all of a sudden, this leaf is behind this leaf. Let's make that happen in a couple other places. I don't know exactly what's here, but let's put that leaf again in front. This is what I mean about painting spot by spot. You have to do this while everything is wet. So now this leaf is, at least what I can see of it, is clearly in front of this leaf. Now I've also created in this back leaf an opportunity. I'm going to drop a little more color into it. To even at this stage, on the second go round, to give it veins. So anytime you have available pigment, you can have veins. You can have those incised lines, the scar on the paper. I can also, at this time, I'll drop in more red because I can and I like it. Now, I pretty much wet this whole leaf, so that's why I can do this. And now that's my transparent layer. I can see what's happening underneath it. Got another place here. I have to decide which one's in front. Let me see. I think, let's see. This is all wet over here, so I have to avoid that. Let's make this leaf in front of this leaf. And I introduce that water. And obviously I had too much pigment and water in my place that I was using to drop in. So let's wick some of that up. Too much. You can always change things on this second layer just by reducing the value of what you did in the bottom layer. Oh, that's much better. Let's do it some more. Do I want to do anything more with this leaf? Actually, this is wet here. I'm going to put this leaf behind this leaf. This leaf is on top of this leaf, so let's make that happen. Blot your brush.
Sally, how about doing some spatter on the leaves? You know, when you look at them, they have those little mold marks.
Yep, yep. You can do that at any time.
Right.
And if you do it while the leaf is wet, sometimes it's even more interesting. Okay, so I've just put this leaf behind this leaf and with way too much water. I'm gonna do just a couple little things about this leaf turning back on itself. A little fold there, casting a shadow on itself. I can do that in a lot of places because it's fun. And I will take a picture of this. So if you want to work on your own stuff right now, I'm going to give you let's make it 10 minutes of just working on your own stuff, and let's see what you can bring to life happening here.
Sally, did you do your branch first or your leaves first?
I did the leaves first.
That's what I thought.
With this, you can see it clearly up here and here. The branch bled into the leaves that were there.
Yep.
Well, same thing. Some of it bled in because the leaves were wet, and some of them did not because they were dry.
Yep.
This is starting to make me a little bit happier than it did. I might have one more branch maybe coming up behind these guys. I think I'll do that right now while you are working, but you've seen me do that before. So I'm going to start at the main branch, up right on the tip of my brush. I just stop at the leaf because it doesn't need to show. And I'm gonna maybe do a little more from that branch over here and over here, just for continuity. And I can also do my drop-in color to such a tiny branch. And if I start at the edge of the little branchlet at the white, I mean the dry part of the paper, I get a good effect from that. A little bit of the blue. And a little bit of the yellow. So I'll be quiet now and let you paint. Well, no, I won't be quiet. I can't do that. I'm not good at that. I've still got this leaf back here that I know I'm going to want to do something with. Haven't decided what. I don't like the edge I got here. I obviously had too much water. I'm losing that edge just by scrumbling it a bit with my damp brush. And trying not to make a new edge anyplace. That's better. One of the joys of using non-staining pigments is that you can come back in even when they're bone dry and get rid of edges that you don't want to have there. If you recall this painting when we started it today, you'll remember that it didn't have this branch. And so it just, to me, that had no logic at that point. I was not enjoying it at all. It was, too contrived. I continue to love these paintings. Not that I think they're great masterpieces. I should say I continue to love the act of these paintings. We have choices about background. We can make that background be clusters of leaves to give us the notion of what's happening in the whole tree. We can't do that yet because everything has to be completely dry before we do any kind of background. We can do a sky. It can be a sunny sky or it can be a stormy sky. So stormy sky, we would be making a gray or variations on a gray, big puddle, so we've got lots to use. And we're going to be painting around, for the sky, we're going to be painting around a lot of what's here. And as part of the composition. So in many places, we'll just be wetting and then dropping in the paint to suggest a cloudy sky or what have you. All of it is kind of just fussy work, especially when you have branches that are so many leaves. Okay, now we're going to get to a point where we're doing sky. So first of all, I'm going to add a bunch of leaves that are just suggestions of the tree beyond what we've highlighted by making it a positive thing. So we need puddles of color, but we do not need them as saturated as what I used when I developed this. Okay, so this is a smaller puddle. I'm going to take some of this, add to it. I want to make sure I have lots of this. And even with this, I'm thinking I might do some drop in color, but I've got a very light value now. And it's a little too intense. I'm going to grab up just a little bit of red. Okay, I have changed it somewhat. I didn't want it to be as bright as the other things happening. I've got a round brush, a good size. This one is a 14. I might switch to a 16. Let's see what happens with this. Again, I'm going to be designing with the brush. I don't want to go to my mop because I don't have as much control over it. So again, I'm just looking for shapes that are like, and it doesn't matter. They can be, they can just be ghosty pieces of paint in the back in some of those areas between the leaves. And it doesn't matter if they cover an edge of the leaf, it puts a shadow on the leaf. That's one of the things I discovered years ago, that some of my accidents when I made things, you know, when I was trying to get them, you know, when I'm trying to add them to a picture like this, when I actually covered something that was already there, it read as a shadow. That's, you know, things exist in space, so that's good. And it doesn't matter if it's, you know, just an accident.
So you're
Nobody.
not painting, you're painting just a shaped blob. You're not trying to,
Some of them are sort of, you know, leaves. Some of them are not.
it's
But
just a light.
I'm not being real careful. Let's put it that way. When I get out here, I will be a little more exact. And I'm up on the tip of my brush. I'm letting the brush give me shapes that are leaf shapes, but they're not, nothing's exact because leaves, you know, undulate and curl and do all kinds of things. And of course, I'm running out of paint. I'll get some more of this. Tone it down a bit. And I'll take a picture of this after we're done with this part, and then I'll dry it off so you can see how I do the sky. And right now, this does not read like a stormy day to me. I could even put some more ghosty branches in here, but don't I don't know that I feel the necessity for that. But I'll judge that later. I'm still thinking leaf shapes, but I'm not being a perfectionist with them. Come out into the area beyond the silhouette of what the tree is, because, you know, the tree goes on for a while outside of our view. I'm liking this. This is fun. Those new leaves don't have to live in isolation. They can cross one another. We don't care what's in front or behind because they're not detailed. I don't know how much you can see that's different there, but it is quite a bit different. Okay.
Stanley, and you wouldn't drop in color into these faded.
I could, but I don't want to make it terribly distinct. Let's see.
Right.
Let's see what happens with a little bit of yellow.
I see what you mean by the corner thing, because you're in the corner too.
Yes, I am. And probably I'm going to cut some of this off.
Well, yeah, but the other corner, it doesn't come out of the corner. It kind of curves there. I
Yeah.
see the difference.
Yeah.
Thank you. Oh,
I love it when you see things.
well, yeah, you have to know what you're looking for. So I appreciate that.
Okay, so I've dropped some yellow into some of these, and I'll do a little bit of red too. Be careful about value for this. Remember, we're not in the same mode as those positive leaves. So you want just a little bit of suggestion, maybe. Yeah, that's a kind of a nice cluster. It might be after it's all dry, might want to do some branches. But let's get this dry quickly so I can do the sky. I don't really like what's happening with this negative space, but maybe I'll think about that later. So these paintings are always quite dynamic in my mind. And some of it's born of thinking about trees in real space, knowing that they flutter in the breeze and that they change their shape. If you were to take a leaf in silhouette and then put it in its real environment, if you would draw that silhouette, it would be kind of a rigid leaf shape that is identifiable for the tree in which it is growing. But if you were to put it in real space and real time, it would undulate and it would change. It would get reflections from other leaves on top of it or behind it. It would get shadows from those surrounding it. It would get things would happen to those leaves because they were getting old or they were brand new. Or they might be curling and becoming something else. So always think in terms of when you're doing real things, live things, there's a dynamism to what's happening. They're not static, and you don't want them to appear to be static. Always hold your paper up to get the reflections off of what's still wet. Sometimes it saves you a lot of trouble. I know I've said this many times. I love this little tool. It's so quiet. I can still talk, and I love to talk. Okay, now everything is dry. But just to be sure, I'm going to see yeah, it's all dry. There's no wet spots. All right. I'm going to go to the 16 brush, I think. This is the wrong 16. Wait. I have two styles of the King Art brushes, and it makes a difference. The 90-20s come into a beautiful point. The 9000 series is still a wonderful brush, but it doesn't come to that fine point. And I really want to have that fine point right now. Okay, what do we have? We have a big puddle of gray. That's our storm. We don't need a lot of saturation here. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do, and I have to do this by area too, plain water. I'm painting, roughly painting around things. Doesn't matter a whole lot if I go over branches. I try to stay into the blank areas first. Every time I touch an area, I'm going to pick up some paint because remember, these are non-staining, and so that paint remains active. Water, water, water. What do I mean when I say I'm looking for planes here? And I don't mean airplanes.
Forward, middle ground, background.
Things that sit behind each other.
Yes.
Angles.
What I'm working on right now is all one plane. Everything that isn't a leaf is all one plane. And I instantly love having bleed from, okay, so I have a defined area. And I have my storm. I have it right here. I'm gonna brush on. This is nice. Kind of green, but that's okay. How will I get rid of that green? I will add a little red to it. So all I'm doing here is suggesting this guy. I don't have to do this any more exactly than this. And stormy days are not just gray, usually. My skies aren't anyway. So I'm applying this not as a wash, but in deliberate little areas. And what's here has to match what's here. Better do that corner, because right now it's just like a sore thumb. It's sticking out. Part of this plane, I've got some drip down here. This is the advantage of having all these brushes. I can make a thirsty brush now to lift up that excess right there and there. I can also come back into this with my thirsty brush. Let me just show you this and get some lightness in the sky. So right in the middle of that puddle of color, I'm just picking up some pigment. Get some light. And I can do that as many times as I want, as long as it's wet. So I work this quadrant to quadrant, area to area. I want to make sure I can finish an area in the time it's wet. And that's why I don't just do the whole thing at once. I want to make sure I have control over this. I like these pointy brushes to wet with because I can make sure that I'm coming up just to the edge of things. Here's all this stuff in here. I want to just drop a little bit of sky color in those. Touch it with my finger maybe. Just want to make sure that the sky doesn't, glimmer out just so bright inappropriately. There are some areas already that I've got that are still white. So I'm just dabbing those with my brush and then rubbing it with my finger to get rid of the sparkle. Let's do this big area here so you can kind of see what happens with that. Again, plain water. Semi-careful as I come to the edges of things. I can see, but you can't probably, my branch is already bleeding into the new wet area. You should do this kind of wet and kind of fast. But you'll be able to see it a little bit better down here. And my friend is my light. I always get down next to this to look sideways at it to see whether everything is sufficiently wet. So this is my brush that I'm going to keep now. As my thirsty brush. It's a 14. No, this is a 16. Okay, back into my puddle. It's going to be a little bit easier down here because I've got, empty space. Don't feel you have to cover that whole area. If it's wet, it'll have a graceful bit of gray in it. While this is this wet, I'm just going to increase the saturation of this puddle a bit. Come on back to gray. Come on back to gray. And because I've still got wetness here, I can make the sky a little more dramatic. And if you end up with too distinct shape, just give it a little more water, but with a thirsty brush, not a sopping wet brush. But you can play games with this for as long as it's wet. But that's why you do it area by area. This is still wet. I want some of that to be Don't get so carried away with the sky that it's more interesting than your leaves. This is quite dry already. As long as you can keep this wet, you can keep working it. And you can play games with the value of your storm puddle to vary the, the sky a bit. Try not to leave halos around anything. I like to use the side of my brush rather than the tip now, so I don't have as much control over the shapes. Let the watercolor do your work.